Kier wasn't sure what to expect when he first arrived at the Alarai embassy on the sprawling diplomatic station orbiting Terran Nova Prime. As a liaison officer for the United Terran Commonwealth, his job was to smooth relations between the freshly starfaring humans and the far more established alien civilizations of the Sector Council. The Alarai were one of the most enigmatic member species, renowned for their intricate culture and their legendary skill at mental sparring, a complex intellectual duel that humans still struggle to understand. The Alarai embassy was a marvel of artistry and engineering, with vaulted corridors carved into seamless organic shapes and walls that shimmered with patterns of bioluminescent silver. Kier was met at the entrance by Yelin, the Alarai diplomat assigned to the human delegation. She was tall, elegant, her skin an unearthly black that shimmered with the faintest silver highlights. Silver-like filaments emerged from her temples, cascading down her back and shifting patterns as she spoke, an outward reflection of her inner thoughts. Beside her stood an unexpected sight, a human man, rugged and broad-shouldered, wearing a Commonwealth officer's uniform. Kier blinked in surprise as the man extended a hand. Captain Rhys Corwin, the man introduced himself, shaking Kier's hand with a firm grip. I'm attached to the Commonwealth's diplomatic security detail, but it looks like we'll be working together. Welcome to the circus. Thanks, Kier said, glancing at Yelin, who watched them with a slightly amused expression. I wasn't expecting backup. I'm not exactly backup, Corwin replied, smirking. Think of me as the guy who makes sure things don't go completely sideways when words fail. Charming, Yelin said, her voice cool but not unkind. Perhaps you should rely less on your brute strength, Captain, and more on your words. If the Commonwealth wishes to earn respect here, it must demonstrate wit and understanding, not just military bravado. That's why Kier's here, Corwin said, motioning toward the younger diplomat. He's the smart one. I just carry the gear. Kier chuckled nervously. I'll do my best to make sure we rely on words over weapons. Yelin's silver filaments shifted into a flowing, almost serpentine pattern. Good. I find it intriguing that your people value wordplay so highly. Humor, especially, seems to hold a peculiar place in human interaction. You joke to break tension, to deflect discomfort. But I find many of your so-called jokes incomprehensible. Humor's not always universal, Kier said, trying to keep his tone light. A lot of it depends on shared context. Without that, even the funniest joke can fall flat. Yelin tilted her head, studying him. Your puns, for example. You twist language in ways that seem illogical, yet your kind finds it amusing. Perhaps you should demonstrate. Kier hesitated, looking at Corwin for help, but the captain just raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying Kier's predicament. Sure, Kier said. What do you call a fish that practices medicine? Yelin's filaments stilled, her expression unreadable. I do not know. A sturgeon, Kier said, grinning. When Yelin didn't react, he coughed and added, it's a play on words. Sturgeon, like a surgeon. Her filaments rippled into sharp, angular shapes. A curious attempt. Your humor is clearly an acquired taste. Perhaps a mind duel would better illuminate the nature of your linguistic games. Corwin frowned. A mind duel? Isn't that an Alarai thing? It is a respected tradition among my people, Yelin explained. A structured exchange of ideas and wit where one's intelligence and creativity are tested. If your people value wordplay as you claim, then surely you would not shy away from such a challenge. Kier swallowed. I've heard of it, but humans aren't exactly trained in that sort of thing. All the more reason to attempt it, Yelin said, her tone suggesting she wasn't entirely serious, or perhaps she was. A true diplomat does not back down from a chance to learn. Corwin clapped Kier on the shoulder. Well, looks like you're up, buddy. I'll handle the heavy lifting, you handle the wordplay. Thanks, Kier muttered. He turned back to Yelin. Okay, I'll give it a shot. When does this, duel happen? Yelin's silver filaments shifted into a more fluid pattern, something that Kier thought might indicate approval. You may select the time and place, so long as it is soon. I am eager to see how human wit fares against Alarai tradition. Kier glanced at Corwin, who simply shrugged. What's the worst that could happen? Let's hope we don't find out, Kier said. He looked back at Yelin. Fine. Let's do it tomorrow evening. Agreed, Yelin said. Prepare yourself, Kier of Earth. The mind duel will reveal much about both our peoples. As she turned and walked away, her filaments trailing behind her like a silver cape, Kier let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Corwin stepped up beside him, crossing his arms. So, what's the plan? Corwin asked. You got a strategy for this duel thing? Not really, Kier admitted. I have no idea what I'm getting into. But if it's about wordplay and ideas, maybe I just need to approach it like a conversation, be quick, clever, and keep my cool. Corwin nodded. Sounds like a good start. Just remember, you've got the Commonwealth behind you. If you need backup, I'll be right here. Thanks, Kier said, feeling slightly reassured. But I think this is one fight I'll have to win with my own words. The next evening, Kier arrived at the designated chamber, trying not to let his nerves show. The room was dimly lit, the walls adorned with intricate, shifting patterns that glimmered faintly. In the center was a circular platform surrounded by chairs, and directly across from him stood Yulin, poised and composed as ever. Corwin entered right behind him, surveying the chamber with his usual casual air. Well, this is cozy, he remarked. Looks like the perfect spot for a friendly intellectual throwdown. Not exactly what I'd call friendly, Kier muttered. I still don't even know all the rules. Yulin turned her attention to them, her silver filaments gently waving as she spoke. The rules are straightforward. We take turns presenting challenges, riddles, linguistic puzzles, philosophical queries. Each response must be thoughtful, creative, and concise. The winner is the one who demonstrates superior wit and mental agility. Corwin crossed his arms. Sounds like a high-stakes debate club. Perhaps it will help if I provide an example, Yulin said, gesturing toward Kier. Your kind often relies on humor to convey complex ideas. Why not share another one of your puns? Kier hesitated, then took a deep breath. All right. What's the best time on the clock to see a dentist? Yulin's expression didn't change, though her filaments briefly flickered. I do not know. When is the best time? 2:30. Kier grinned, but the moment stretched awkwardly as Yulin remained silent. Corwin broke the tension with a chuckle. Now that's one I've heard before. Classic. Yulin's filaments shifted, forming a flowing, serpentine pattern. Curious. I can see the linguistic shift. 2:30 becomes 2:30. Is the humor derived solely from the phonetic similarity? Pretty much, Kier admitted. It's not high art or anything, but it's the kind of simple wordplay that gets a laugh back on Earth. I see. Yulin nodded thoughtfully. In that case, let us proceed with the mind duel. You may begin. Kier cleared his throat, scrambling to think of a proper challenge. Okay, here's a riddle. What has cities but no houses, forests but no trees, and rivers but no water? Yulin's filaments stilled as she considered his words. After a few moments, she said, a map. Correct, Kier replied, relieved that he didn't have to explain further. Yulin's turn came quickly. Consider this question. If a ship's crew begins their journey with 20 members and each day one crew member must leave but 2 more join, how many members will be aboard after 5 days? Kier frowned, working through the numbers in his head. So, you lose 1 every day but you gain 2. That's a net gain of 1 per day, right? Starting with 20, after 5 days you'd have 25 crew members. Correct, Yulin said, her filaments pulsing softly. A straightforward test of arithmetic reasoning. Corwin, who had taken a seat near the back of the room, leaned forward. Not bad, Kier. You're holding your own. Thanks, Kier muttered, feeling a little more confident. As the duel progressed, their challenges became more complex. Yulin presented a series of abstract philosophical dilemmas that forced Kier to think deeply about the nature of trust and responsibility. In turn, Kier crafted wordplay-based puzzles that required Yulin to grasp subtle double meanings and cultural references that were entirely foreign to her. Between rounds, the tension began to ease. Yulin's previously stiff demeanor softened, and Kier noticed that she seemed genuinely curious, even amused, by some of the exchanges. Her questions became more conversational, and he found himself enjoying the mental back and forth. At one point, Yulin paused after Kier had successfully answered one of her riddles. I find it intriguing how your humor relies on shared cultural knowledge. A wordplay that is obvious to one group may be completely opaque to another. It is a form of what you might call a cultural marker. Kier nodded. That's a good way of putting it. Puns and jokes only work if everyone involved gets the reference. Without that, it's just nonsense. Corwin chimed in, his voice casual. That's why human diplomats carry a stash of dad jokes. Breaks the ice with just the right amount of confusion. Yulin tilted her head, her filaments forming a subtle spiral pattern. This concept of dad jokes, are they a subgenre of humor specifically tied to paternal figures? Sort of, Kier said, smiling. They're simple, often groan-worthy puns that people associate with dads because they're the kind of jokes a parent might tell to get a quick laugh or an eye roll from their kids. Yulin seemed to consider this. Fascinating. Humor as a familial bonding tool. By the time they reached the final round of the duel, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted noticeably. The tension of competition had given way to a shared sense of discovery. Kier no longer felt like he was simply trying to win, he was genuinely interested in learning how the Alarai approached language and thought. Yulin's final challenge was particularly intricate, a poetic riddle that required Kier to interpret layers of metaphor and cultural nuance. It took him several minutes of careful consideration before he offered an answer. That is correct, Yulin said at last, her voice carrying a note of approval. You have shown remarkable adaptability, Kier. It appears that humor and wordplay can indeed transcend species. Not bad for a guy who's never done this before, Corwin said, giving Kier a thumbs up. Yulin turned to Corwin. You have been an observant witness, Captain. Tell me, how would you judge the human response to our tradition of mental sparring? Corwin shrugged, his tone light. Honestly? I think it's great. Humans like a good challenge, and it sounds like we're learning a lot from this exchange. I say let's keep it going. Yulin inclined her head, her filaments shimmering in what Kier thought might be a gesture of agreement. Perhaps we shall. This encounter has given me much to consider. Kier, feeling a sense of accomplishment, smiled. It's been a unique experience. Thanks for giving me the chance. And thank you for accepting the challenge, Yulin replied. I hope our future interactions will continue to build upon what we have started here. As they left the chamber, Kier glanced at Corwin. Think I made the right impression? Corwin grinned. If you didn't, at least you kept it interesting. And that's worth a lot in this line of work. Kier laughed, feeling lighter than he had when they first arrived. The duel was over, but the connection it had forged was only just beginning. Kier found himself revisiting the Alarai embassy far more frequently than he'd anticipated. After the mind duel, Yulin seemed keen to continue their discussions. But these meetings weren't confined to formal chambers. Instead, they strolled through the station's arboretum, where artificial gravity allowed Terran and alien plants to grow side by side. It was a strange but serene setting, with trees from Earth casting long shadows over flowering vines from Alarai Prime. On one particular walk, Kier was joined not only by Yulin but also by Captain Rhys Corwin. The tall, broad-shouldered officer, who had initially seemed more bodyguard than conversationalist, had developed an easy rapport with Kier and even begun to warm up to Yulin. It was a relief to have another human around, someone who could fill the silences when Kier ran out of clever things to say. So, Corwin said, crunching a small dried fruit that Yulin had offered. You're saying this thing tastes sweet, but also sour with a hint of what? A memory? Not precisely a memory, Yulin replied, her silver filaments shimmering in gentle waves. It evokes an impression, a feeling that cannot be easily defined. Alarai cuisine values these subtleties, as much as your people seem to value salt and spice. Subtlety's not really our thing, Corwin said, glancing at Kier. Right? Kier smirked. You'd be surprised. Humans can be pretty nuanced. We just layer it in a lot of noise. Noise? Yulin repeated, sounding thoughtful. A concept that might explain why humor is so difficult for me to grasp. Your laughter often follows what appears to be nonsense. Corwin shrugged. Sometimes nonsense is the point. Makes you think in a way you weren't expecting. And let's be honest, half the time we're laughing just because it feels good. Not because it's particularly clever. Yulin tilted her head. Do you mean that humor is a release, rather than a challenge? Sure, Corwin said. But it can be both. Like Kier's pun about the sturgeon. Not exactly the height of wit, but it got a chuckle out of me. That's gotta count for something. Kier chuckled. Low bar, but I'll take it. Yulin regarded them both, her expression unreadable. Perhaps I have been approaching your humor too seriously. If it is meant to evoke a simple reaction, then my search for deeper meaning may have been misguided. Or maybe Kier offered the meaning isn't something you find, it's something you feel. They stopped beside a small bench surrounded by fragrant blossoms. Corwin leaned against a nearby tree, arms crossed, while Yulin and Kier sat. For a while, they simply watched the other diplomats and staff wander the arboretum. The quiet hum of the station's environmental systems served as background noise, giving the place an almost park-like calm. Yulin broke the silence. You are not what I expected, Kier of Earth. When I first heard of the human delegation, I anticipated brashness and patience. Yet you approach our exchanges with an open mind and you have introduced me to perspectives I had not considered. Kier scratched the back of his neck, feeling self-conscious. I'm just trying to learn. I didn't expect any of this either. I thought I'd be filing reports and attending a few boring meetings. Instead, I'm walking through a garden with an Alarai diplomat talking about what makes people laugh. Not exactly what they covered in training, huh? Corwin quipped. Kier shook his head. Not even close. Yelin's filaments shimmered in a pattern Kier now recognized as amusement. I find your adaptability commendable. Perhaps it is this ability to change and grow that makes your species intriguing. Just another way of saying unpredictable, Corwin said, grinning. Yelin considered that, her gaze drifting to the vibrant, hybrid flora around them. Unpredictability can be unsettling. Yet it also allows for creativity, for innovation. Your people find ways to thrive in situations others might find insurmountable. We're good at winging it, Corwin said. Not always pretty, but we get the job done. Kier laughed. It's true. Humanity's best plan is usually made up on the fly. Yelin's gaze returned to them, her expression softening. And yet, you have also shown me that even in improvisation, there can be artistry. You weave connections where others might see only chaos. The conversation drifted after that, shifting to lighter topics. Yelin explained the cultural significance of certain Alarai rituals, and Corwin shared stories from his military days, nothing classified, just tales of camaraderie and the occasional bizarre encounter on the far edges of human territory. Kier listened, feeling a growing camaraderie among the three of them. As they walked back toward the main corridor, Corwin leaned over to Kier. You know, I didn't think this assignment would turn into whatever this is. I mean, I was expecting bureaucratic headaches and a lot of standing around. But this. He motioned to Yelin, who was walking a few paces ahead, her filaments glowing faintly in the soft light. This feels different. Yeah, Kier said quietly. It does. When they reached the embassy's entrance, Yelin stopped and turned to face them. Captain Corwin. Thank you for your presence today. Your perspective has been valuable. Hey, I just stand here and look tough, Corwin said, grinning. But you're welcome. And Kier, she continued, her tone softer. Our conversations have been enlightening. I look forward to the next. Me too, Kier replied. She inclined her head and then disappeared into the shimmering interior of the embassy. Corwin clapped Kier on the back. Well, you seem to be making friends in high places. Keep it up. Kier smiled, but he didn't reply. Instead, he found himself wondering when their next walk in the Arboretum might be, and what more he might learn from Yelin. For now, though, it was enough to know that the lines between their worlds were beginning to blur. Kier paced the quiet observation deck, his footsteps muffled by the station's soft flooring. The stars stretched endlessly before him, the vibrant glow of nebulae adding splashes of color to the blackness of space. It was his favorite spot, a place to think. Tonight, though, thinking didn't bring him clarity, it brought questions. His interactions with Yelin over the past weeks had left him feeling something he couldn't quite name. He wasn't alone for long. A few minutes after he arrived, the doors slid open, and Captain Rhys Corwin entered, his broad frame filling the entranceway. Mind if I join you? Corwin asked, his tone casual. Of course not, Kier replied, waving him in. What's up? Nothing much. Just thought I'd check in, Corwin said, taking a place beside him at the viewport. He crossed his arms, his stance relaxed but his gaze sharp. You've been spending a lot of time with Yelin lately. Kier looked at him, startled. You keeping tabs on me now? Corwin chuckled. Not really. Just noticing. You've been in and out of the embassy almost every day. Something going on I should know about. Nothing official, Kier said quickly. Just cultural exchange. Corwin gave him a knowing look. Aha, cultural exchange. Right. Look, it's none of my business, but if you're getting, said, his voice laced with skepticism. But talking has a way of turning into something else. I've seen it happen before. Just make sure you're ready for what comes next. Kier frowned, considering Corwin's words. What comes next? Whatever you want it to be, Corwin replied. But you've got to figure that out for yourself. They stood in silence for a while, the vastness of space stretching before them. Finally, Corwin clapped Kier on the shoulder and left him alone with his thoughts. The next day, Kier returned to the embassy. Yelin was waiting in the reception hall, her posture as elegant as ever. She greeted him with a nod, her silver filaments shifting in a calm, flowing pattern. Kier, I was wondering when you would return. Sorry, he said. Got caught up in some other duties. Understandable, she said, motioning for him to follow. They walked together down a corridor that seemed to glow with its own inner light. I was hoping we could continue our discussion from last time. Of course, Kier replied. What's on your mind? I have been reflecting on your concept of humor, Yulin said. It is intriguing, a form of communication that is not always logical, yet often meaningful. Kier smiled. That's one way to put it. She paused at a large, open chamber where a fountain-like structure bubbled with shimmering liquid. They sat on a low bench nearby. Yulin turned to him, her filaments shifting subtly. You have been very forthcoming, Kier. I appreciate your patience with my questions. Any time, Kier said. I've learned just as much from you as you have from me. Her gaze softened. It is rare for me to feel understood, even among my own people. Kier hesitated, sensing something deeper in her words. What do you mean? My position requires me to maintain a certain distance, Yulin explained. But with you, that distance feels unnecessary. Kier studied her expression, noting the slight change in her posture, the way her filaments moved in a gentle rhythm. I don't think I've ever felt like there's any distance between us, he said, his voice low. I just enjoy being around you. Yulin's filaments brightened slightly, a reaction he had come to recognize as positive. That is gratifying to hear. They sat quietly for a moment, the sound of the fountain filling the space. Kier took a chance, reaching out to lightly touch her hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, with a texture that was both unfamiliar and comforting. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, lightly brushing her fingers against his. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. Kier felt his chest tighten, his mind racing with what to say next. But before he could speak, Yulin smiled, faintly, but unmistakably. I believe I am beginning to understand, she said softly. Understand what? Kier asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why humans value connection so deeply, she replied. And why you use humor as a bridge to it. He smiled, a warmth spreading through him. It's not just humor. It's everything. We find meaning in each other. That's what keeps us going. Her gaze held his, and for the first time, Kier felt certain that the connection he'd sensed between them wasn't one-sided. The line between their worlds, once so stark, had faded into something far more complicated and far more meaningful. The observation deck had become their refuge. Kier often brought Yulin there to escape the formal corridors of the station. The stars seemed closer in that quiet space, their light unbroken by the station's glowing walls. It was a place where they could talk freely, unbound by protocol or cultural expectation. On one such evening, Kier stood at the viewport, arms crossed, staring out at the endless expanse. Yulin joined him, her steps almost silent. The soft rustle of her long, flowing garments and the faint shimmer of her silver filaments signaled her presence. You've been unusually quiet, she observed, standing beside him. Just thinking, Kier replied. He turned to face her. About everything. About us. She tilted her head, her filaments swirling into a gentle, circular pattern. Us. Kier hesitated. I mean, what we've been building. This connection. It's unexpected, but it's there. At least, I think it is. Yulin's gaze softened, her silver filaments glowing faintly. It is. I feel it too. The admission hung in the air between them, a fragile truth that neither had dared to voice until now. Kier looked down at his hands, then back at Yulin. But where does that leave us? Our worlds are so different. You have your responsibilities, your traditions. I have mine. Can we work? Yulin's filaments pulsed in a thoughtful rhythm. You speak as though our differences are barriers. But they are also our strength. I have learned more from you than I ever imagined possible. If anything, our differences have brought us closer. But what about everything else? Kier asked. What about the council? The Commonwealth? What if they don't understand? Yulin stepped closer, her presence calm and steady. Understanding comes with time. If we act with honesty and integrity, we can show others that this connection is not a threat, but a bridge. Kier gave a small laugh. That's a lot of pressure to put on two people. Perhaps, Yulin said, a hint of warmth in her voice. But perhaps it is no more pressure than the pressure we place on ourselves. And I believe we are capable of bearing it. Her words gave Kier pause. He hadn't expected such unwavering confidence from her, and it stirred something within him. He reached out, lightly touching her hand. Her skin was cool, smooth, a texture he'd grown to recognize and even find comforting. She didn't pull away, instead, she turned her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. We've already done so much together, Kier said softly. We've learned to see the universe through each other's eyes. Maybe that's enough. Yelin's filaments shifted in a pattern that Kier now knew meant affection. Perhaps it is. And perhaps it will lead to even greater understanding, not just for us, but for those who follow. They stood in silence, the stars their only witnesses. In that quiet moment, Kier realized that it didn't matter whether anyone else understood. What mattered was the connection they had found, a connection that had crossed not just cultural divides but entire worlds. For the first time in weeks, Kier felt a sense of calm. They would figure out the rest together. And with that thought, he finally let go of the worry and let himself simply be. The station's arboretum was unusually quiet, the gentle hum of the life support systems almost masking the faint trickle of artificial streams. Kier and Yelin walked side by side, following a winding path through the greenery. Captain Rhys Corwin had joined them, though he kept a respectful distance, allowing them to lead the conversation. It's strange, isn't it? Kier said, glancing up at the sky simulation projected above. Standing under this artificial sky, talking about things that could change everything. Yelin's silver filaments swirled gently. Change does not come easily. Yet it is necessary. Without it, understanding cannot grow. Corwin snorted softly from behind them. You make it sound so simple. Kier stopped and turned to face Corwin. It's not simple. But it's not impossible either. We've already proven that. Have we? Corwin asked, raising an eyebrow. You and Yelin get along great, sure. But what happens when someone up top decides they don't like it? Yelin stepped forward, her presence calm but firm. If that happens, we will address it together. Trust and mutual respect are stronger than any decree. Easy to say when you're not the one who'll get a memo about inappropriate diplomatic relationships, Corwin muttered. Kier gave him a wry smile. I'll handle the memos. You just keep doing what you do best. Standing around and looking intimidating? Corwin joked, though his expression softened. Fine. But don't think I'm not going to point out every "I told you so" when this gets complicated. Yelin tilted her head. Complications are a natural part of progress, Captain. It is through challenges that we discover our true strength. Corwin sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Fine. Just know I've got your back. Thanks, Rhys, Kier said, his tone sincere. The three of them continued down the path, the tension easing with each step. Kier and Yelin led the way, their pace slow and deliberate. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, differences in cuisine, amusing diplomatic blunders, and the peculiar habits of various alien delegates. By the time they reached a small bench surrounded by flowers, the atmosphere had become almost playful. Yelin took a seat, her filaments shimmering softly. Your stories of human interactions never fail to amuse me, Kier. Your people's tendency to overcomplicate simple matters is endearing. Kier chuckled as he sat beside her. It's part of our charm. Corwin leaned against a nearby tree, crossing his arms. So what's next, you two? What's the grand plan for this human-ally buddy comedy? Buddy comedy? Kier said, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, that's what it feels like. The awkward diplomat and the enigmatic alien. Getting into all kinds of hijinks. Corwin teased. Yelin's filaments rippled in what Kier had learned was her equivalent of a laugh. An amusing concept, though I doubt it would be well received by the Sector Council. Kier smiled, but his expression turned serious. Honestly, I don't know what's next. We've been navigating all of this step by step. For now, I think we just keep doing what we're doing, learning from each other, building trust. Whatever comes after, we'll deal with it then. Yelin nodded. That approach has served us well so far. And it will continue to do so. Corwin gave a mock salute. Well, that's as close to a plan as we're gonna get. Guess I'll just keep an eye on things from the sidelines. Just don't get too comfortable, Kier said, smirking. I might need you to deliver one of those "I told you so" speeches after all. Corwin grinned. Wouldn't dream of missing it. The three of them sat together for a while, enjoying the rare moment of quiet amid the complexities of their roles. The artificial sunlight bathed the arboretum in a warm glow, and for a brief time, it felt as though they were far removed from the weight of diplomacy and expectations. Kier glanced at Yelin, her features relaxed and her filaments moving in soft, soothing patterns. He reached over and gently took her hand. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment before a subtle, serene smile appeared. We'll figure it out, Kier said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Yes, Yelin replied, her voice calm and certain. We will.